The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Cedar Ridge Public Library, casting long shadows across rows of carefully organized books. Grace Chen pushed her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose and smiled at the familiar sight. At 26, she had spent the last 8 years of her life in this exact spot, surrounded by stories that belonged to other people. Grace loved the smell of old books and the quiet whispers of pages turning. She knew every corner of this building better than her own apartment. The mystery section was her favorite place to organize, though she rarely read mysteries herself. She preferred classic literature and poetry books that made her feel smart and sophisticated. Her daily routine never changed. Every morning at 7:30, she unlocked the heavy wooden doors. She would check the returned books, sort them by category, and place them back on their proper shelves. Grace took pride in keeping everything perfectly organized. Every book had its place, just like she had hers. The other librarians often joked that Grace was more comfortable with fictional characters than real people. They weren't wrong. She could discuss the complicated love life of characters in romance novels for hours, but when it came to her own relationships, Grace was completely lost. She had never been on a real date, never held hands with someone she liked, and definitely never experienced the kind of passion she read about in books. Grace lived in a small apartment above the town's flower shop. Her walls were covered with overflowing bookshelves. She had collected thousands of books over the years, but somehow, they made her feel more alone than ever. Every evening she would come home, make herself a simple dinner, and lose herself in someone else's adventures. Her social life was almost non-existent. Grace attended book clubs at the library twice a month, but even there she mostly listened to others talk. She was the quiet one who always had the right answer about plot details, but never shared her own opinions about life or love. Cedar Ridge was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Grace was known as the shy librarian, who never caused trouble and always kept to herself. People were friendly enough, but they had stopped trying to include her in social events years ago. Grace had politely declined so many invitations that people eventually stopped asking. The truth was, Grace was scared of the real world. Books were safe. In books, she could experience exciting adventures and passionate romances without any risk of getting hurt. Real life seemed messy and unpredictable. What if she said the wrong thing? What if people didn't like the real her? It was easier to stay hidden behind her desk, helping other people find the stories they wanted. That Tuesday started like any other day. Grace was organizing the new arrivals when Mrs. Patterson, the library director, approached her desk with a worried expression. Mrs. Patterson was in her 60s and had been running the library for over 30 years. She was usually cheerful and optimistic, but today she looked stressed. "Grace, we need to talk," Mrs. Patterson said, pulling up a chair. "I just got off the phone with the town council. They're planning to cut our funding by 60%. Grace felt her stomach drop. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we might have to close down," Mrs. Patterson replied sadly. "The council thinks people don't use libraries anymore because of the internet and digital books. They want to use our building for a new community center." Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. The library was more than just her job. It was her whole world. "What can we do to stop this?" "There's a town hall meeting tomorrow night. The council will be discussing the budget cuts, and we need someone to speak up for the library, someone who can explain why this place matters to our community." Grace's heart started racing. The idea of speaking in front of a room full of people terrified her. She had never spoken publicly about anything, let alone something this important. "Can't you do it? You're so much better at talking to people." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "I'll be there. But Grace, you're the one who really knows this place. You know every person who comes in here, every program we run, every life we've touched. The council needs to hear from someone who truly understands what we'll lose if this library closes." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Grace tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to the upcoming meeting. She watched the regular visitors come and go. Old Mr. Kim, who came every day to read newspapers. Teenage Jenny, who was working on her college applications. Young Mother Lisa, who brought her twins for story time. How could she make the town council understand that this wasn't just about books? This was about community, about connection, about providing a safe space for people who needed it. Grace realized she had been taking all of this for granted. She had been so focused on her own small world that she hadn't noticed how important the library was to so many other people. That evening, Grace sat in her apartment, staring at a blank piece of paper. She wanted to write a speech that would save the library, but the words wouldn't come. She had read thousands of inspiring speeches in books, but writing her own felt impossible. Every time she started, she crumpled up the paper and threw it away. Grace walked to her window and looked down at the quiet main street of Cedar Ridge. The town looked peaceful, but she knew that tomorrow night, she would have to face her biggest fear. She would have to stand up in front of everyone and find her voice. For the first time in her life, reading about courage in books wasn't enough. She needed to find real courage within herself. She picked up her pen again and started writing. This time, instead of trying to sound impressive, she wrote from her heart. She wrote about the elderly man who learned to use computers at the library. She wrote about the teenagers who found refuge here after school. She wrote about the book clubs that brought lonely people together. She wrote about herself, a shy girl who had found her place in the world among these shelves. As Grace wrote, she realized something important. She had been hiding behind books for so long that she had forgotten she had her own story to tell. Tomorrow night, whether she was ready or not, she would have to step out from behind her comfortable desk and into the real world. The thought terrified her, but for the first time in years, it also excited her. Grace finished her speech just before midnight. She read it over once, folded the paper carefully, and placed it on her nightstand. Tomorrow would be the day her quiet, predictable life would begin to change forever. She just didn't know it yet. The old pickup truck rumbled down Main Street, stirring up dust in the late afternoon sun. Behind the wheel, Cole Martinez squinted through the windshield at the small town spread out before him. Cedar Ridge looked exactly like his Uncle Ray had described it. Quiet, friendly, and about 50 years behind the rest of the world. Cole had been driving for 3 days straight, moving from ranch to ranch as he had done for the past 12 years. At 30, he had worked cattle in Texas, broken horses in Colorado, and helped with harvests in Kansas. He was good at what he did, but more importantly, he never stayed anywhere long enough to get attached. That's how he liked it. Uncle Ray had called him 3 weeks ago, his voice shaky and tired. "Cole, I hate to ask, but I need help. The arthritis is getting bad, and I can't manage the ranch on my own anymore. Would you consider coming home for a while?" Home. Cole hadn't thought of Cedar Ridge as home in over 15 years. He had left right after high school, eager to see the world beyond the small town where he grew up. But Uncle Ray was the only family he had left, and the old man had always been good to him. The ranch looked smaller than Cole remembered. The fences needed repair, the barn needed paint, and the pastures were overgrown with weeds. Uncle Ray met him at the front porch, walking slowly with a cane. The man who had once seemed larger than life now looked fragile and old. "You made good time," Uncle Ray said, giving Cole a firm handshake despite his arthritis. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "You asked," Cole replied simply. "That's enough." They spent the evening catching up over coffee and discussing the ranch's problems. Uncle Ray had been struggling financially for the past 2 years. Medical bills were piling up, and he hadn't been able to keep up with the physical demands of ranch work. The property taxes were due in 6 months, and he didn't have the money to pay them. "There's a town meeting tomorrow night," Uncle Ray mentioned as they finished dinner. "The council is discussing budget cuts. I usually go to these things, but my back is acting up. Would you mind representing our interests?" Cole wasn't much for town politics, but he agreed. He had learned long ago that in small communities, everyone needed to participate if they wanted things to work. The next evening, Cole cleaned up and put on his best jeans and a button-down shirt. The town hall was packed with more people than he expected. He recognized some faces from his childhood, though most people looked older and more worried than he remembered. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order and began discussing various budget cuts. Cole listened with growing concern as they talked about reducing funding for road maintenance, cutting the volunteer fire department's budget, and eliminating support for local businesses. Then they got to the library funding. The library cost the town $40,000 a year, Councilman Brown announced. "With digital books and the internet, we feel this is an unnecessary expense. We propose converting the building into a community fitness center." Several people in the audience murmured their disapproval, but nobody spoke up to argue. Cole wasn't surprised. Small-town politics often worked this way. People complained privately but were afraid to challenge the council publicly. Then a young woman near the front of the room stood up slowly. Cole had been half listening until that moment. But something about her nervous posture caught his attention. She was small and slender, with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a modest blue dress and kept pushing her glasses up her nose. "May I speak?" she asked in a quiet voice that barely carried to the back of the room. Mayor Thompson nodded. "State your name for the record." "Grace Chen. I'm the head librarian." Her voice was shaking, but she continued. "I know you think libraries are outdated, but you're wrong about our community not needing this service." Cole found himself leaning forward, interested despite himself. There was something captivating about watching this obviously shy woman find her courage. Grace's speech started hesitantly, but as she continued, her voice grew stronger. She talked about the elderly residents who came to the library for computer classes. She mentioned the teenagers who did homework there because they didn't have internet at home. She described the reading programs for children and the book clubs that brought isolated people together. "This library isn't just about books," Grace said, her cheeks flushed with emotion. "It's about connection. It's about making sure everyone in our community has access to information and education, regardless of their income. If you close the library, you're telling people that learning and growing together doesn't matter." Cole was impressed. This quiet librarian was fighting harder for something she believed in than most politicians fought for votes. Her passion was genuine and her arguments were smart. More importantly, she wasn't giving up even though she was clearly terrified. When Grace finished speaking, the room was silent for a moment. Then several people started clapping, and soon most of the audience was applauding. Grace looked surprised by the positive response, as if she hadn't expected anyone to listen to her. The council members looked uncomfortable. They clearly hadn't expected such an articulate defense of the library. After some discussion, they agreed to postpone the decision for 2 weeks to allow for more community input. As the meeting ended and people began filing out, Cole found himself walking toward the front of the room where Grace was packing up her notes. She looked exhausted but relieved. "That was a good speech," he said, causing her to look up in surprise. Up close, Cole could see that Grace had beautiful brown eyes behind her glasses. She was prettier than he had initially thought. In a quiet, understated way, there was something refreshing about her complete lack of artifice. No makeup, no fancy clothes, no attempt to impress anyone. "Thank you," Grace replied, her cheeks turning pink. "I've never spoken publicly before. I was terrified." "You couldn't tell," Cole lied smoothly. "You seemed like a natural." Grace smiled for the first time since he'd noticed her. "I'm Grace Chen, by the way. I don't think we've met. Cole Martinez. Ray Martinez is my uncle. I'm helping him with his ranch for a while." Recognition flickered in Grace's eyes. "I remember you from high school. You were a few years ahead of me. You left town right after graduation." Cole was surprised she remembered him. He had no memory of her from high school, though he supposed a quiet girl like Grace wouldn't have moved in the same circles as a restless kid like him. "That's right. I've been working ranches all over the country since then. Just got back yesterday." They walked toward the parking lot together, making small talk about the town and how it had changed. Cole found Grace easy to talk to once she relaxed a little. She was smart and had a dry sense of humor that surprised him. "Well, I should get going," Grace said when they reached her small sedan. "Thank you for the encouragement about my speech. It really means a lot." "Good luck with saving the library," Cole replied. "For what it's worth, I think you made a strong case tonight." As Grace drove away, Cole stood in the parking lot for a moment thinking. He had met plenty of women over the years, confident ranch hands, flirty bartenders, and sophisticated city girls. But there was something different about Grace Chen. She had a quiet strength that intrigued him. In a world full of people trying to impress everyone around them, her genuine simplicity was refreshing. Cole climbed into his truck and headed back to the ranch, but he couldn't stop thinking about the shy librarian who had found her voice when something important was at stake. He wondered what other surprises Grace Chen might be hiding beneath her quiet exterior. Maybe staying in Cedar Ridge for a while wouldn't be as boring as he had expected. Grace had replayed the town hall meeting in her mind dozens of times over the past 3 days. Every time she remembered standing up to speak, her heart raced with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had actually done it. She had found her voice when it mattered most. But what surprised her even more was the memory of Cole Martinez talking to her afterward. She remembered him from high school, though they had never spoken back then. He had been one of those confident, popular guys who seemed to belong everywhere, while she had been the invisible girl who ate lunch in the library. Grace was organizing returned books when the bell above the library door chimed. She looked up to see Cole walking in, looking slightly out of place among the quiet shelves and reading tables. He was wearing worn jeans and a flannel shirt, and his dark hair was still damp from what looked like a recent shower. "Hi," he said, approaching her desk with an easy smile. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "Of course not. How can I help you?" Cole looked around the library as if seeing it for the first time. "Uncle Ray mentioned he's been meaning to get help with the ranch's bookkeeping. He said you might be able to recommend some guides or maybe give me some pointers on organizing financial records." Grace brightened. This was her element, helping people find information. "Absolutely. Follow me to the business section." As they walked between the stacks, Grace explained the library's organization system. Cole listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about different resources. Grace found herself relaxing as they talked. When she was discussing books and information, she felt confident and knowledgeable. "Here are the basic bookkeeping guides," Grace said, pulling several books from a shelf. "These are written for small businesses, but the principles are the same for ranch management." Cole picked up one of the books and flipped through it. "This looks helpful, but to be honest, I'm better with my hands than with numbers on paper. I've been managing ranch finances by keeping everything in my head, but Uncle Ray's operation is more complex. Would you like me to show you some basic spreadsheet programs on the computer?" Grace offered. "They can make tracking expenses and income much easier." Cole grinned. "That would be great if you have time." Grace led him to one of the library's public computers. As she sat down to demonstrate a simple accounting program, Cole pulled up a chair beside her. He smelled like soap and hay and something else she couldn't identify. Something masculine and outdoorsy that made her slightly nervous. "See, you can set up categories for different types of expenses," Grace explained, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Feed costs, veterinary bills, equipment repairs, anything you spend money on regularly." Cole leaned closer to see the screen better. "That makes sense. And you can track income the same way?" "Exactly. Cattle sales, hay sales, any other revenue streams." Grace was in her element now, explaining how to create formulas and generate reports. She had forgotten to be nervous. "You really know your stuff," Cole said admiringly. "I bet you could run a business better than most people who actually own them." Grace laughed. "I doubt that. I've never run anything more complicated than a library book sale." "Don't sell yourself short. You're obviously smart and you pay attention to details. That's more than a lot of business owners can say." They spent the next hour working through the program together. Grace was surprised by how easy Cole was to teach. He asked good questions and picked up the concepts quickly. More than that, he seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. "This is incredibly helpful," Cole said as they finished up. "I can't thank you enough for taking the time to show me all this." "It's my job," Grace replied, though they both knew she had gone well beyond basic library service. "Well, your job or not, I owe you lunch. Are you free tomorrow?" Grace's heart skipped. Was he asking her on a date? No, that was ridiculous. He was just being polite, offering to repay her for the help. "You don't owe me anything, really." "I know I don't owe you," Cole said with a smile. "I'm asking because I'd like to spend more time talking with you. Unless you're not interested." Grace stared at him, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part of her was terrified. What would they talk about? What if she said something embarrassing? What if he realized how boring she really was? I don't really go out much," she said finally. "Then it's definitely time you started," Cole replied gently. "Come on, Grace, it's just lunch. What's the worst that could happen?" Before she could change her mind, Grace nodded. "Okay, but somewhere quiet, please. I know just the place." They made plans to meet at Murphy's Diner the next day at noon. After Cole left, Grace sat at her desk staring blankly at her computer screen. She couldn't believe she had just agreed to have lunch with Cole Martinez. What was she thinking? The next morning brought an unexpected spring thunderstorm. Grace had walked to work as usual, but by lunchtime, rain was coming down in sheets. She grabbed her umbrella and hurried toward Murphy's Diner, but the wind was too strong. Halfway there, her umbrella turned inside out and broke. Grace tried to shelter the book she was carrying under her jacket. but it was no use. By the time she reached the diner, she was soaked through and her hair was plastered to her head. She stood in the doorway, dripping wet and feeling mortified. Cole was already there, sitting in a corner booth. When he saw her, he immediately stood up and came over with a handful of napkins from the dispenser. "You look like you wrestled with the storm and lost," he said with a grin, offering her the napkins. "I feel like it too," Grace replied, trying to dry her face and glasses. "I'm sorry I'm such a mess." "Are you kidding? You look like a woman who's not afraid to get caught in a little rain. That's pretty brave." Grace looked at him in surprise. Most people would have been embarrassed to be seen with someone who looked like a drowned rat. But Cole seemed genuinely unbothered by her bedraggled appearance. "Here, let me help," Cole said, taking her wet jacket and hanging it on a nearby coat hook. His hand brushed against hers as he took the jacket, and Grace felt an unexpected jolt of electricity at the contact. They slid into the booth, and Grace immediately felt self-conscious about her wet hair and rumpled clothes. But Cole kept the conversation flowing easily, asking about her work at the library and sharing stories about his travels to different ranches. "I've been to almost every state west of the Mississippi," Cole said, as they waited for their food. "But I have to admit, most of it looks the same after a while. Rolling hills, cattle, more rolling hills." "That sounds amazing to me," Grace said wistfully. "I've never been more than 50 miles from Cedar Ridge." Cole looked genuinely surprised. "Never? Not even for vacation?" Grace shook her head, feeling embarrassed. "My parents weren't really the traveling type, and after they died, I don't know. It seemed too complicated to plan trips by myself. What about places you'd like to see? Everyone has somewhere they dream about visiting." Grace thought about the travel books she had read over the years, the pictures of distant places that had captured her imagination. "Paris," she said quietly. "I've always wanted to see Paris, the museums, the architecture, the cafes where famous writers used to sit." "Paris is beautiful," Cole said. "I spent a few days there once when I was working on a ranch in France. But you know what struck me most about it?" Grace leaned forward, eager to hear about a place she had only seen in photographs. The way people just lived their lives there. They sat in cafes and watched the world go by. They walked along the river in the evening just to enjoy being outside. They weren't rushing around trying to accomplish something all the time. They were just experiencing the moment. "That sounds wonderful," Grace said, though she couldn't really imagine living that way herself. Their food arrived, and they continued talking as they ate. Cole told her about sleeping under the stars in Montana, about learning to cook over a campfire, about the satisfaction of working with his hands all day. Grace found herself sharing more than she usually did, telling him about her favorite books and the programs she had started at the library. As they finished lunch, the storm began to clear. Cole walked Grace back to the library, and they lingered outside the entrance, neither wanting the conversation to end. "Thank you for lunch," Grace said, "and for not making me feel embarrassed about getting caught in the rain." "Thank you for agreeing to come," Cole replied. "I enjoyed talking with you. You see things differently than most people I meet." "Differently how?" Cole thought for a moment. "You notice details. You think about things deeply, and you're not trying to impress anyone. You're just genuinely yourself." Grace didn't know what to say to that. She had never thought of her shyness and social awkwardness as positive qualities. "I'd like to see you again," Cole said. "Maybe next time we can do something that doesn't involve getting drenched." Grace smiled. "I'd like that too." As she watched Cole walk away, Grace realized that something had shifted during their lunch together. For the first time in her life, she had spent time with someone who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. Cole didn't seem to mind that she was quiet or that she had never traveled anywhere exciting. He actually seemed to like talking with her. The following week passed in a blur of nervous anticipation for Grace. Cole had started visiting the library almost daily, sometimes to use the computer for ranch business, sometimes just to chat while she worked. Each conversation left Grace feeling more confused about her own feelings. She found herself paying more attention to her appearance in the mornings, choosing her clothes more carefully and even wearing a little lip gloss. These small changes felt revolutionary for someone who had spent years trying to blend into the background. On Thursday afternoon, Grace was helping elderly Mrs. Foster find a large print mystery novel when she noticed Cole browsing the travel section. He was flipping through a book about European destinations, studying the photographs with obvious interest. After Mrs. Foster left with her book, Grace approached Cole nervously. Planning another adventure? Cole looked up with a smile. Actually, I was thinking about our conversation the other day. You mentioned wanting to see Para. Grace felt her cheeks warm. Oh, that was just daydreaming. I'm not really the traveling type. Why not? Cole asked, closing the book and giving her his full attention. What's stopping you? Grace struggled to find an answer that didn't sound pathetic. I guess I've just never been good at living life. I'm better at reading about other people's experiences than having my own. Cole studied her face for a moment. Can I ask you something? When you were giving that speech at the town meeting, how did it feel? Terrifying, Grace replied without hesitation. But also, I don't know, like I was finally saying something that mattered. Exactly. You stepped outside your comfort zone and look what happened. You might actually save the library because you found the courage to speak up. Grace had been thinking about this too. The town council had agreed to reconsider their decision, largely because of the community support her speech had generated. Several people had stopped by the library to thank her and express their support. That was different, Grace said. That was about something important. And your life isn't important? Cole asked gently. The question caught Grace off guard. She had never really thought about her own life in those terms. She existed. She did her job well. She didn't cause problems for anyone. But important? That seemed like too strong a word. Cole seemed to sense her internal struggle. Grace, I've been thinking about something and I want to run an idea by you. Feel free to say no if it sounds crazy. Okay, Grace said cautiously. I think we could help each other. You've already helped me tremendously with the ranch bookkeeping. Uncle Ray was amazed at how organized everything became after our computer session. But I noticed something when you were showing me those programs. You learned the software by reading the manual, but you'd never actually used it for anything real. Grace nodded. That was true. She had taught herself dozens of computer programs over the years, but had never applied them to actual projects. Here's what I'm thinking, Cole continued. You helped me improve my reading and writing skills. I never finished high school properly, and while I can handle basic ranch paperwork, I struggle with more complex documents. In return, I teach you about living life outside of books. Grace's heart started racing. What do you mean by that? I mean real experiences. Trying new things, going new places, pushing yourself to step outside your comfort zone. Think of it as practical life. Education. The idea both thrilled and terrified Grace. I don't know if I'm brave enough for that kind of thing. You were brave enough to stand up in front of the whole town, Cole pointed out. You're braver than you think. And I'm not talking about anything dangerous or extreme, just living a little. Grace bit her lip, considering. The logical part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. She barely knew Cole, and the thought of deliberately putting herself in uncomfortable situations made her stomach churn. But another part of her, a part that had been growing stronger since the town meeting, was intrigued. What kind of things are you talking about? She asked. Cole's face lit up with enthusiasm. Well, for starters, have you ever been horseback riding? Never, Grace admitted. Perfect. That could be lesson 1. Have you ever been camping, dancing? Driven anywhere just to see what you'd find? Grace shook her head to all of these questions, feeling more sheltered and inexperienced with each one. See, there's a whole world of experiences waiting for you, Cole said. And in return, you could help me tackle some of those books I've been avoiding my whole adult life. Deal? Grace looked around the library at the familiar shelves and quiet reading corners that had been her whole world for so long. For the first time, instead of feeling comforted by the familiar surroundings, she felt slightly trapped. I'm scared, she said honestly. Good, Cole replied. That means it matters. If you're not a little scared, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. Grace took a deep breath. Okay, but we start with something small. Absolutely. How about this weekend? I could teach you to ride, and afterward you could help me work through some of those business books you recommended. This weekend? Grace's voice came out as a squeak. Cole laughed. Too soon? Grace almost said yes, that it was too soon, that she needed more time to prepare, but then she realized that if she waited until she felt ready, she would never do it at all. No, she said, surprising herself. This weekend is fine. But I don't have any riding clothes or equipment. Don't worry about that. Uncle Ray has some old boots that might fit you, and jeans are fine for learning. Just wear something you don't mind getting dirty. Getting dirty. Grace couldn't remember the last time she had deliberately done something that might result in getting dirty. The thought made her nervous but also strangely excited. They made plans for Saturday morning. Cole would pick her up at 9, and they would spend the morning at the ranch. Grace would have lunch with Cole and Uncle Ray, and then she would help Cole with his reading in the afternoon. After Cole left, Grace spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation. She kept second-guessing her decision, but every time she considered backing out, she thought about his question. Wasn't her life important enough to take some risks? That evening, Grace stood in her apartment staring at her closet full of modest dresses and cardigan sweaters. She owned exactly one pair of jeans which she had bought years ago but never worn. She pulled them out now, along with a simple t-shirt and sneakers. Looking at herself in the mirror wearing casual clothes felt strange. Grace was used to dressing professionally, conservatively, but the jeans and t-shirt made her look younger, more approachable somehow. Friday dragged by impossibly slowly. Grace found herself checking the clock constantly and making small mistakes in her work because she couldn't concentrate. Several regular patrons commented that she seemed distracted, which only made her more nervous. Mrs. Patterson stopped by her desk in the afternoon. "Grace, you seem different lately, more energetic, I suppose. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Grace replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Everything was definitely changing, but whether that was fine remained to be seen. That night, Grace lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Tomorrow she would climb onto a horse for the first time in her life. She would spend time on a working ranch, surrounded by animals and dirt and all the messy realities of life outside her carefully controlled library environment. The thought should have been purely terrifying, but instead Grace felt a flutter of excitement alongside the fear. For 26 years she had lived safely within the boundaries of what she knew. Tomorrow she would step outside those boundaries and see what she was really capable of. Grace pulled her covers up to her chin and tried to calm her racing heart. In a few hours her real education would begin. Cole Martinez was going to teach her how to live, and she was going to teach him how to learn. The arrangement seemed fair, but Grace suspected she was going to get much more out of the deal than Cole was. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Grace's last thought was a quote from one of her favorite books. "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." Tomorrow, she would find out what treasures might be waiting outside her comfortable cave. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Grace had been awake since 5 o'clock, too nervous to sleep. She had changed clothes 3 times before settling on her jeans, sneakers, and a simple blue t-shirt. When Cole knocked on her door at exactly 9 o'clock, she was ready but terrified. "You look perfect for ranch work," Cole said with an encouraging smile. "Ready for your first lesson in living?" Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. As they drove toward the ranch, Cole kept up a steady stream of conversation about horses, ranch life, and his Uncle Ray. Grace was grateful for his easy chatter because it kept her mind off what she was about to attempt. The Martinez Ranch was more beautiful than Grace had expected. Rolling green pastures stretched toward distant hills, and the morning sun cast everything in a golden glow. Several horses grazed peacefully in a nearby field, looking much larger and more intimidating than they had in books. Uncle Ray was waiting for them by the barn. He was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile. "So you're the librarian who's been helping my nephew with the books," he said, shaking Grace's hand. "Cole tells me you're quite the teacher." "I just showed him some computer programs," Grace replied modestly. "Don't let her downplay it," Cole interjected. "She completely reorganized our whole filing system in one afternoon. Uncle Ray, you should see how neat everything is now." Uncle Ray chuckled. "Well, if you can work that kind of magic with Cole's education, you're a miracle worker. That boy never did like sitting still long enough to read." Cole led Grace into the barn, where the smell of hay and horses enveloped them. Grace had never been in a barn before, and she was surprised by how peaceful it felt. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "This is Daisy," Cole said, leading a gentle-looking brown mare out of her stall. "She's Uncle Ray's oldest horse, and she's been teaching people to ride for about 15 years. She's patient and steady, perfect for beginners." Daisy was smaller than Grace had expected, but still intimidating. The horse looked at Grace with large, intelligent eyes that seemed to be evaluating her. "Can she tell that I'm scared?" Grace asked. "Probably," Cole admitted. "But horses are used to nervous riders. The key is to stay calm and confident even if you don't feel that way." Cole spent the next hour teaching Grace the basics: how to approach the horse, how to brush her, how to put on the saddle and bridle. Grace was surprised by how much preparation went into riding. In books, people just jumped on horses and rode off into the sunset. The relationship between horse and rider is built on trust, Cole explained as he adjusted the stirrups. Daisy needs to know that you're in control and that you won't do anything to hurt her. What if I fall off? Grace asked, eyeing the distance from the saddle to the ground. Then you get back on, Cole said simply, but you won't fall off. I'm going to be right here with you. When it was finally time to mount the horse, Grace's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Cole could hear it. With his help, she managed to get her foot in the stirrup and swing her leg over. Suddenly, she was sitting on top of a living, breathing animal, feeling higher off the ground than she had expected. How does it feel? Cole asked, holding Daisy's lead rope. Terrifying, Grace said honestly. But also amazing, Cole grinned. That's exactly how it should feel. He led them around the corral slowly, teaching Grace how to hold the reins and how to communicate with the horse through gentle pressure. Grace was amazed at how responsive Daisy was to her movements. After about 20 minutes, she began to relax and actually enjoy the sensation of moving with the horse's rhythm. You're a natural, Cole said proudly. Want to try steering on your own? Grace's first instinct was to say no, but she surprised herself by nodding. Cole released the lead rope and stepped back, giving Grace control of the horse for the first time. For the next half hour, Grace practiced walking Daisy around the corral. It was nothing like the dramatic galloping scenes she had read about in books, but it was exhilarating in its own quiet way. She was actually doing something she had never imagined herself capable of. All right, that's enough for your first lesson, Cole said as Grace brought Daisy to a stop. How do you feel? Proud, Grace said, surprised by her own answer. I actually did it. You did more than that. You were fearless out there. Grace laughed as Cole helped her dismount. I don't think anyone has ever called me fearless before. Then they haven't been paying attention. After taking care of Daisy, they went to the ranch house for lunch. Uncle Ray had prepared a simple meal of sandwiches and homemade soup. Grace found herself relaxing as they ate, listening to stories about ranch life and Cole's childhood adventures. This boy was always getting into trouble, Uncle Ray said with obvious affection. Climbing trees, chasing cattle, building forts in the hay barn. His parents used to joke that he had more energy than 3 normal kids. What made you want to leave Cedar Ridge? Grace asked Cole. Cole considered the question while finishing his sandwich. I guess I felt like I was suffocating here. Everyone knew everything about me, and I wanted to see what else was out there. I thought staying in one place meant giving up on life. And now? Grace prompted. Now I'm not so sure. There's something to be said for having roots, for being part of a community that cares about you. After lunch, they moved to the ranch house's front porch, where Grace had brought several books to help Cole improve his reading skills. She had chosen a mix of materials, some basic grammar guides, a few short story collections, and some ranch management texts that would be directly useful for his work. I have to admit, I'm nervous about this part, Cole said as they settled into comfortable chairs on the porch. I've always felt stupid when it comes to reading and writing. You're not stupid, Grace said firmly. You just haven't had the right kind of instruction. Let's start with something simple. Grace had Cole read aloud from a short story about a traveling cowboy. She was surprised by how well he actually read. His comprehension was good and he only struggled with a few unfamiliar words. The problem wasn't his intelligence. It was his confidence. You read that beautifully, Grace said when he finished. Your voice has a nice rhythm to it. Cole looked skeptical. I stumbled over half the words. You stumbled over 3 words out of about 500. That's not bad at all. They spent the next hour working on reading comprehension and basic writing exercises. Grace discovered that Cole learned best when she connected the material to things he already knew and cared about. When they read passages about ranch management or animal care, he absorbed the information quickly and could discuss it intelligently. The problem with school, Cole said during a break, was that nothing seemed relevant to my life. I couldn't see the point of reading stories about people in situations I'd never be in. That's exactly why I love books, Grace replied. They let me experience situations I'll never be in. But I understand why that might not appeal to everyone. You know what's funny? Listening to you talk about books makes me want to read them. You make everything sound interesting and important. Grace felt a warm glow at the compliment. She had never thought of herself as particularly persuasive or inspiring. As the afternoon wore on, Grace found herself sharing her passion for literature in a way she never had before. She talked about characters as if they were real people, explained how authors used language to create emotions, and discussed the themes that made certain books timeless. "I never realized how much thought went into writing," Cole said, after Grace finished explaining the symbolism in a short story they had read together. "I always just read the surface level and missed everything underneath." "It takes practice to see the deeper layers," Grace said. "But once you start noticing them, reading becomes so much richer." When the sun began to set, they reluctantly decided to call it a day. As Cole drove Grace back to town, they both seemed reluctant for the afternoon to end. "Thank you for today," Grace said as they pulled up in front of her apartment. "I never imagined I could ride a horse. Thank you for helping me with the reading. You're an amazing teacher, patient and encouraging. I actually enjoyed it," Grace smiled. "Same time next week?" "Absolutely. But next week I want to teach you something different. How do you feel about learning to dance?" Grace's eyes widened. "Dance? I don't know the first thing about dancing." "Perfect. That means you'll learn it fresh without any bad habits to unlearn." As Grace climbed the stairs to her apartment, she felt different than she had that morning. She had ridden a horse, spent time on a working ranch, and discovered that she actually enjoyed teaching someone who wanted to learn. More than that, she had realized that stepping outside her comfort zone wasn't as terrifying as she had imagined. Grace looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and was surprised by what she saw. Her cheeks were flushed from the sun and wind, her hair was slightly messy from wearing Uncle Ray's old riding helmet, and there was dirt under her fingernails for the first time in years. Instead of looking disheveled, she looked alive. For the first time in her adult life, Grace went to bed excited about what the next week would bring. She was learning that there was a big difference between reading about adventures and having them, and she was eager to discover. 3 weeks had passed since Grace's first horseback riding lesson, and her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Cole had been true to his word, introducing her to new experiences every weekend. She had learned to dance at Murphy's weekly community night, tried her hand at cooking over a campfire, and even gone fishing at the creek behind the ranch. Each new adventure had chipped away at the walls Grace had built around herself. She found herself speaking up more at work, laughing more easily, and even making small talk with library patrons she had previously just helped in silence. The dancing lesson had been particularly memorable. Grace had been terrified of making a fool of herself in front of other people, but Cole had been patient and encouraging. By the end of the evening, she was actually enjoying the music and the movement, even if her steps weren't always perfect. "You're getting good at this," Cole had said as they swayed to a slow song. "A few more weeks and you'll be ready for that Paris cafe dancing you read about." Grace had laughed, but the comment had stayed with her. For the first time, Paris seemed like a real possibility, rather than just a distant dream. Their tutoring sessions had become equally rewarding. Cole's reading had improved dramatically, and Grace had discovered that she loved teaching outside the formal structure of library programs. Cole approached literature with fresh eyes, asking questions that made Grace see familiar stories in new ways. "I never realized how much authors reveal about their own lives in their writing," Cole had said during their last session. "This guy Hemingway, his characters are always trying to prove their courage, just like you said he was in real life." Grace had beamed with pride at his insight. Cole was proving to be a thoughtful and intelligent student when the material was presented in a way that engaged him. Now, on a Friday evening in late spring, Cole had planned their most ambitious adventure yet, a camping trip to the mountains about 2 hours from Cedar Ridge. Grace had never spent a night outdoors in her life, and the prospect both thrilled and terrified her. They had driven up the winding mountain road in Cole's truck, the beds of his pickup loaded with camping gear. Grace had packed enough supplies for a week, unsure what she might need for one night in the wilderness. "You know we're only staying one night, right?" Cole had teased when he saw her 3 bags. "I wanted to be prepared," Grace had replied defensively. "That's what I love about you," Cole had said, and then seemed to realize what he had said. They had both fallen quiet for a moment, the weight of that casual love hanging in the air between them. Now they were sitting around a small campfire, watching the sun set behind the mountain peaks. Grace had never seen such a vast sky or felt so small and yet so connected to the world around her. "It's beautiful," she said softly, watching the first stars appear. "It is," Cole agreed. But when Grace looked over, he was watching her instead of the sky. They had cooked dinner over the fire, simple hot dogs and beans, but Grace thought it was the most delicious meal she had ever tasted. Everything seemed more intense out here, away from the familiar walls and routines that had defined her life. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said as they finished eating. "Of course. What happened to your parents? You mentioned they died, but you never talk about them." Grace was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. She rarely discussed her parents with anyone, but something about the intimate setting and Cole's gentle tone made her want to open up. "Car accident when I was 18, she said quietly. "I was away at college, just finished my freshman year. They were driving to pick me up for summer break." Cole's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." It was. But the worst part was the guilt. If I had taken the bus home like I originally planned, they never would have been on that road. Grace had never admitted this to anyone before. "Grace, that's not your fault. You know that, right?" "Logically, yes. But emotionally," she shrugged. "I think that's when I started hiding from life. It seemed safer to live through books than to risk losing anyone else." Cole reached over and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused from ranch work, and Grace felt that familiar jolt of electricity at his touch. "Is that why you never dated anyone seriously?" he asked gently. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. Cole's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, and she felt tears threatening to spill over. "I've been so scared of everything," she whispered. "Scared of getting hurt, scared of disappointing people, scared of not being good enough." "Good enough for what?" "For anything. For friendship, for love, for having a real life." The words tumbled out of her before she could stop them. "I've spent 8 years hiding in that library, telling myself I was content, but I was just terrified." Cole was quiet for a moment, still holding her hand. "Can I tell you a secret?" Grace looked at him through her tears. "I've been running away from connection my whole adult life. Different ranches, different towns, never staying anywhere long enough to get attached. I told myself it was because I loved adventure and freedom, but really, I was just as scared as you were." "Scared of what?" "Of not being enough. Of people realizing I'm just a high school dropout who's good with horses and not much else. Of staying in one place and discovering that I'm actually boring." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "You think you're boring? Cole, you're the most interesting person I've ever met. You've lived more in 30 years than most people do in a lifetime. And you're the smartest, kindest, most genuine person I've ever met. But we're both too scared to see ourselves clearly." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire crackle and the stars grow brighter overhead. Grace had never felt so connected to another person, so understood and accepted. "Cole," she said finally, "yeah? I want to ask you something, but I'm scared you'll think I'm crazy." Cole squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Try me." Grace took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "These past few weeks with you have been the best of my life. You've taught me that I'm braver and stronger than I ever imagined. You've shown me what it feels like to really live instead of just exist." She paused, her heart racing. I don't have any experience with relationships or intimacy or any of that. But I trust you, and I care about you, and I—" She trailed off, unable to find the right words. Cole turned to face her fully, his eyes serious in the firelight. "What are you asking, Grace?" "I'm asking if you would teach me about that too. About love, about being close to someone. I know it's probably selfish asking you to be my teacher for something so personal, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what I missed." Cole studied her face for a long moment. "Grace, are you sure? This isn't like learning to ride a horse or dance. This is more important," Grace finished. "I know. That's exactly why I wanted to be with you. You've been so patient with everything else, so gentle and encouraging. I can't imagine trusting anyone else with something this significant." Cole reached up and cupped her face gently with his free hand. "You're not asking me to be your teacher, Grace. You're asking me to be your first love. And you should know, I want to be your last love too." Grace's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you. Hard. I came to Cedar Ridge thinking I'd help Uncle Ray for a few months and then move on to the next adventure. But somewhere along the way, you became my adventure. You became my home." Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy rather than sadness or fear. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't even know what that meant until I met you." Cole leaned closer, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Are you sure about this, Grace? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. I won't be able to pretend I'm just your friend anymore." "I don't want to go back," Grace said firmly. "I've spent my whole life playing it safe and it got me nowhere. I want to take this risk with you." Cole smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had first caught her attention at the town meeting. "In that case, your next lesson starts now." He leaned in and kissed her softly, gently, giving her time to get used to the sensation. Grace had read about first kisses in countless books, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The warmth, the tenderness, the way her entire body seemed to come alive at his touch. When they broke apart, Grace laughed softly. "That was much better than I imagined." "And that was just the beginning," Cole said, pulling her closer to him beside the fire. As they sat together under the vast, starry sky, Grace realized that she had finally stopped reading about life and started living it. And it was more beautiful and terrifying and wonderful than any story she had ever found in a book. 2 months had passed since the camping trip, and Grace's transformation was visible to everyone who knew her. She smiled more often, spoke with confidence, and had even started wearing her hair down instead of in the tight bun that had been her trademark for years. The shy librarian who had once hidden behind her desk was blooming into a vibrant, confident woman. Her relationship with Cole had deepened beyond what she had ever imagined possible. They spent almost every evening together, either at the ranch or walking through town talking about everything and nothing. Cole had been patient and gentle as he introduced Grace to physical intimacy, always letting her set the pace and making sure she felt safe and cherished. The library funding crisis had been resolved after Grace organized a community fundraising campaign. Her newfound confidence had made her a natural leader, and the town had rallied around her efforts. The library was not only safe but had received additional funding for new programs and technology updates. Grace had even started planning her first real vacation, a trip to Chicago to visit museums and experience city life. It wasn't Paris yet, but it was a start. Cole had offered to come with her, but Grace wanted to prove to herself that she could travel alone. Everything seemed perfect, which was why the phone call on that Tuesday morning hit like a thunderbolt. Grace was organizing the new book shipment when Cole's phone rang. She could hear him talking in the ranch management section, but couldn't make out the words. His tone gradually shifted from casual to serious to excited, and when he hung up, he sat in silence for several minutes. "Everything okay?" Grace asked, approaching him with concern. Cole looked up at her with an expression she couldn't read. Part excitement, part worry, part something else entirely. "That was Bill Patterson from the Double R Ranch in Montana. He's offering me the ranch manager position." Grace felt her stomach drop, but she forced herself to smile. "That's wonderful. You've been working towards something like this for years." "Grace," Cole started, but she cut him off. "Tell me about it. What would you be managing?" Cole hesitated, then began explaining the opportunity. The Double R was a massive operation. 5,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, year-round employment with excellent pay and benefits. It was the kind of position that could set him up for life, potentially leading to ranch ownership someday. "It sounds like an amazing opportunity," Grace said, and she meant it even though her heart was breaking. "The thing is, they need an answer by Friday, and if I take it, I'd need to be there by the end of the month." Grace nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. "You should definitely consider it seriously." That evening, Cole was unusually quiet during dinner at the ranch house. Uncle Ray seemed to sense the tension and excused himself early, leaving Grace and Cole alone on the front porch. "You've been thinking about the Montana offer," Grace said. It wasn't a question. "I have," Cole admitted. "Grace, this is everything I've worked for. The chance to run my own operation, to put down real roots somewhere." "I know," Grace said softly. "And I'm happy for you, really." Cole studied her face in the porch light. "Are you?" "Because you seem upset." Grace forced another smile. "I'm not upset. Maybe a little sad that our lessons will have to end, but that was always temporary anyway." "Grace, what are you talking about? This doesn't have to change anything between us. Cole, Montana is 800 miles away. Of course it changes things." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Come with me. The words hung in the air between them. Grace stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. What? Come with me to Montana. We could build a life there together. Grace's heart raced. The idea was tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Cole, I can't just leave Cedar Ridge. I have a job here, responsibilities. The library needs me. They can find another librarian. Grace, when will you get another chance like this? To start fresh somewhere new? To really live the adventures you've been reading about? This is different, Grace said, feeling panic rising in her chest. Moving across the country, leaving everything I know, that's not an adventure, that's running away. How is it running away? It's running toward something. Toward us, toward a future together. Grace stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. I can't do this, Cole. I'm not ready for something this big. You said you wanted to stop playing it safe. I said I wanted to take risks, not abandon my entire life. Grace's voice was rising and she struggled to control it. This isn't about being brave anymore. This is about you getting a job offer and expecting me to just drop everything and follow you. Cole stood up too, his own frustration evident. That's not fair, Grace. I'm not expecting anything. I'm asking you to consider building something with me. In Montana, where I don't know anyone. Where I'd have no job, no support system, nothing except you. Would that be so terrible? Having me? Grace felt tears threatening. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Cole, what if it doesn't work out between us? Then I've given up everything for nothing. Cole's expression grew hurt. Is that really what you think? That we won't work out? I don't know. Grace exploded. 3 months ago, I had never even been kissed. I don't know how to evaluate a relationship or make decisions about the future. All I know is that asking me to move across the country after just 2 months together feels like too much, too fast. They stared at each other across the porch, both breathing hard. Grace could see the pain in Cole's eyes, but she couldn't take back her words because they were true. I see, Cole said finally, his voice carefully controlled. I thought we meant more to each other than that. We do mean something to each other, Grace said desperately, but meaning something doesn't automatically translate into making life-altering decisions. Cole nodded slowly. You're right. I guess I got carried away. The distance in his voice made Grace's chest ache. Cole, please don't be like this. Can't we find some other solution? Like what? Long distance? Visiting each other on weekends when I can get time off from a job that requires me to be available 24 hours a day? Grace didn't have an answer for that. They both knew long-distance relationships were difficult under the best circumstances. I need to think about this, Cole said finally. I need to make a decision about the job. Grace nodded, though she felt like crying. I understand. The next few days passed in uncomfortable tension. Cole still came to the library, but their interactions were stilted and formal. Their tutoring sessions continued, but the easy closeness they had developed was gone, replaced by painful politeness. Grace threw herself into her work, but she couldn't stop thinking about their argument. Was she being unreasonable? Was she letting fear disguise itself as practicality? Or was Cole being unfair to expect her to uproot her entire life for his career opportunity? On Thursday evening, Grace was locking up the library when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Walsh were talking near the town square, and their voices carried clearly in the quiet evening air. I heard Cole Martinez is leaving town, Mrs. Henderson was saying. Got himself a big job offer in Montana. About time, Mr. Walsh replied. Boy's been restless his whole life. Can't say I'm surprised he's moving on again. I feel sorry for that librarian girl, though. Grace Chen. Word is they've been spending a lot of time together lately. Well, she should have known better than to get involved with someone like him. Fellows like Cole Martinez don't stick around small towns. They're always looking for the next adventure. Grace felt like she had been slapped. The casual dismissal of their relationship, the implication that she had been naive to believe Cole might stay, it all hit too close to her own fears. But worse was the realization that people were already talking about Cole's departure as a foregone conclusion. Had he already made his decision? Had he accepted the Montana job without telling her? Grace walked home in a daze, her mind reeling. When she reached her apartment, she sat on her couch and tried to think clearly. Maybe the townspeople were right. Maybe she had been foolish to believe that someone like Cole would want to build a permanent life with someone like her, in a place like Cedar Ridge. After all, what did she really have to offer him? She was inexperienced, sheltered, and tied to a small town that probably felt limiting to someone who had traveled across the country. Maybe the Montana job offer was just a convenient excuse for Cole to move on to his next adventure, like he always had. The thought made Grace feel sick, but it also clarified something for her. She couldn't uproot her entire life for someone who might not even want her to. She had worked too hard to build confidence and independence to give it all up on the hope that love would be enough. Grace picked up the phone to call Cole, then put it down again. What was the point? If he had already decided to leave, there was nothing left to discuss. If he hadn't decided yet, pressuring him would only push him toward the door. For the first time in months, Grace felt truly alone. The walls she had worked so hard to tear down were rebuilding themselves, and she didn't know how to stop them. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Grace's mood perfectly. She had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and replaying every conversation she'd had with Cole over the past few months. Was their entire relationship just a temporary arrangement that had gotten out of hand? Had she been naive to believe it meant something lasting? Grace arrived at the library early, hoping to lose herself in work before the day officially began. She was organizing the return cart when Mrs. Patterson appeared, looking unusually flustered. "Grace, we have a problem," she said without preamble. "I just got word that the state is conducting a surprise audit of our funding compliance next week. They want to see documentation of every program we've run, every dollar we've spent, and every community impact we've claimed." Grace felt her stomach drop. "Do we have all the documentation they need?" "Some of it. But our record-keeping system is a mess, and some of the files are still in the old format. We need everything organized and presented professionally, or we could lose our renewed funding." This was exactly the kind of crisis Grace had been dreading. The library had just gotten back on solid financial ground, and now they were facing another potential disaster. "How long do we have to prepare?" 5 days. "Grace, I hate to ask this of you, but you're the only one who knows our systems well enough to pull this together. Would you be willing to work over the weekend?" Grace nodded immediately. "Of course. The library is too important to risk." As Mrs. Patterson left to handle other preparations, Grace sat down at her computer and began making lists of what needed to be done. It was an overwhelming amount of work, but she had no choice. The library, her sanctuary, her workplace, her second home, was depending on her. She was deep in organizing digital files when she heard the familiar sound of boots on the library's wooden floor. Without looking up, she knew it was Cole. "Grace, we need to talk," he said, approaching her desk. "I'm sorry, but I can't right now," Grace replied, not meeting his eyes. "We have a state audit next week, and I have to get everything organized. This is important. So is this." Grace gestured to the stacks of papers and opened computer files. "The library could lose its funding if I don't get this done." Cole was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You're avoiding me." Grace finally looked up at him. "I'm working. There's a difference. Grace, I haven't accepted the Montana job yet. I told them I needed until today to give them an answer." Grace's heart skipped, but she forced herself to remain calm. "And what are you going to tell them?" "I don't know. That's why I need to talk to you. Cole, you don't need my permission to take a job. Do what's best for your career." What's best for my career and what's best for my life might be two different things. Grace felt tears threatening again. "Please don't make this harder than it already is. I'm not trying to make it hard. I'm trying to figure out what we both want." "What I want," Grace said, standing up to face him directly, "is for you to stop putting this decision on me. I can't tell you whether to take the job or not. That has to be your choice." Cole ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But your choice affects my choice. If you won't even consider coming with me, then what? You'll stay here and resent me for holding you back? Oh, thank you. That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Grace's voice was rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "Cole, this job is everything you've worked for. If you turn it down because of me, how long before you start wondering what might have been? And if I take it and lose you, how long before I start wondering what I gave up?" They stared at each other across the desk, both breathing hard. Grace could see the pain and confusion in Cole's eyes, but she couldn't help him make this decision. She had learned too much about standing on her own to give that up now. "I have to get back to work," Grace said finally. "The audit preparation won't wait," Cole nodded slowly. "I'll call them this afternoon." After he left, Grace threw herself into her work with desperate intensity. She spent the entire day organizing files, creating spreadsheets, and preparing documentation. The repetitive tasks helped keep her mind off Cole, and the conversation that had felt like a goodbye. That evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, Grace was surprised to find Uncle Ray waiting by her car when she left the library. "Ray? What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, Grace. Mind if I buy you a cup of coffee?" Grace wanted nothing more than to go home and hide under her blankets, but something in Ray's expression told her this was important. Okay. They walked to Murphy's Diner in comfortable silence. Ray ordered coffee for both of them and waited until the waitress left before speaking. "Cole called Montana this afternoon," Ray said without preamble. "He turned down the job." Grace's heart lurched. "He did what?" "Told them he appreciated the offer but had decided to stay in Cedar Ridge." Grace felt a mixture of relief and panic. "Ray, he can't do that because of me." "That job was perfect for him, was it?" Ray asked mildly. "Grace, I've known that boy since he was 12 years old. I've watched him run from every good thing that ever happened to him, always chasing the next adventure, the next opportunity. You know what I've never seen before?" Grace shook her head. "I've never seen him fight for something. Until now." "What do you mean?" Ray leaned forward. "After he called Montana, Cole spent the rest of the day working on something. He won't tell me what. But he's been making phone calls, writing letters, driving all over the county. Whatever it is, he's more determined than I've ever seen him." Grace frowned, confused. "I don't understand. Neither do I completely. But I think he's trying to find a way to build the life he wants right here, instead of running away to find it somewhere else." Grace felt tears starting again. "Ray, I can't be responsible for him giving up his dreams." "What if you're not giving up his dreams? What if you are his dreams?" The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She had been so focused on not holding Cole back that she hadn't considered the possibility that staying might be what he actually wanted. "I'm scared," Grace admitted. "I've never been this important to anyone before." "What if I let him down?" Ray smiled gently. "Grace, you organized a campaign that saved this town's library. You taught my nephew to love reading. You turned yourself from a shy girl who was afraid of her own shadow into a confident woman who stands up for what she believes in. I think you're selling yourself short." Grace stared into her coffee cup, processing Ray's words. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should stop being so afraid of making the wrong choice that you don't make any choice at all." Saturday morning brought unexpected chaos to the library. Grace arrived early to continue her audit preparation, but she found a crowd of people gathered outside the building. Mrs. Patterson was there, along with Mayor Thompson, several town council members, and at least 30 residents she recognized. "What's going on?" Grace asked, approaching Mrs. Patterson. "I'm not entirely sure," Mrs. Patterson replied, looking puzzled. "People just started showing up about an hour ago. They said someone called them and asked them to be here." Grace looked around the crowd and spotted familiar faces. Mr. Kim, who came every day to read newspapers. Jenny, the teenager who used the computers for college applications. Lisa, the young mother who brought her twins to story time. There were elderly residents, young families, business owners, and students. Then she saw Cole pushing through the crowd, carrying a thick folder and looking nervous but determined. "Grace," he called out. "I'm glad you're here. I have something I need to show everyone." Grace's heart started racing. "Cole, what is this?" "This," Cole said, holding up the folder, "is my answer to your state audit problem." He climbed the library steps so everyone could see him. "Most of you know me as Ray Martinez's nephew, the guy who left town years ago and just came back. What you might not know is that over the past few months, Grace Chen has been teaching me something important, that there's value in putting down roots, in being part of a community that cares about each other." Grace stared at him, not understanding where this was going. "Yesterday, Grace told me that the library was facing another funding crisis due to a state audit. The state wants proof that this library truly serves the community and justifies its funding, so I spent yesterday collecting that proof." Cole opened the folder and began reading. "Mr. Kim, you told me that the free computer classes Grace organized helped you learn to email your grandchildren in Korea. Jenny Martinez, no relation, you said the college prep resources here helped you get a full scholarship to State University. Lisa Thompson, you mentioned that the children's programs gave your twins a safe place to learn and play while you looked for work." Grace's eyes widened as Cole continued reading. Testimonial after testimonial from community members. He had spent the day documenting every life the library had touched, every service it provided, every reason the community needed it to survive. This library isn't just a building full of books, Cole continued, his voice growing stronger. It's a community center, an educational resource, a safe haven, and a place where people connect with each other. Grace Chen has spent years quietly making sure this place serves everyone who needs it, and now it's time for us to serve her. The crowd began murmuring agreement, and several people started clapping.